Let me just, I'm going to close now. I'm going to close with one more story. And this story is happened this past summer in Western Kenya when I was there. Some of you that were in my Lives of Consequence class already heard the story, so I'm sorry I haven't run about that. But this is something that cemented my conviction to doing this project. When I was there in Western Kenya, my job was to take an existing NGO's poverty reduction program and expand that to a new district. And so in doing that, I had to identify one community, approximately the same size we're targeting, that was the poorest community that needed our help, that fit our kind of model, and that there was a real need there. Well, there's thousands of those communities in Western Kenya. There are thousands of people that need our help. And I didn't really understand this at first. So on our very first trip, our very first sublocation to do this research, we went out and I had my then friend, he became my friend, the guy I hired from Kenya, Daniel, and we were being taken around guided by one of the farmers. His name was Absalom. He was very well respected in the community. And as is typical in those days, we walked probably 20 miles out into the bush from farm to farm talking to these farmers. And our last stop that day was at a house of a lady named Josephine. I'll never forget her name. And we got to her house, and Absalom began the whole pitch. Basically, we had instructed him to tell these farmers that we were here to do research only, to collect data on poverty in Western Kenya, to see if we could do something about it. And not to tell them that we were here to help, because we did not want to raise their expectations. We had hundreds of communities to visit before we made a decision. And so if we weren't going to come back there, we would crush their hopes. So it was very key not to get their hopes up. So Absalom kind of went into his spiel about how we were there to collect the data, and as he's talking to her, I'm looking around at her living conditions, and it really started to kind of hit me. There she was. She lived in a mud hut, probably about the size of this area right here, from the couch around. The walls were made of, they were covered with cow manure to prevent the mud walls from corroding in the rain. She had grass thatched roof, which she had to replace every 2 months. Horrible living conditions. And as I began to listen to her responses to Absalom's questions, I began to learn about her. Her husband had just died the year before from AIDS. She had 5 children under the age of 7, and her family was starving. She and her 2 oldest kids hadn't eaten in 2 days, and they typically ate. They had maybe 3 or 4 meals a week. The youngest 2 kids, the youngest 3 kids, she tried to feed once a day and try to get them a meal. And when I say meal, the meal is a bowl of water with some corn flour stirred in to make this really weak porridge. And her kids were dying. And as she talked and talked, it really began to impact me. And my heart began to break for this woman. And as she talked longer, Absalom finally broke down and said, "These people are here to help us. Take hope. Don't worry. They're here." And at that point, she looked at me and she started crying softly. And I looked in her eyes and she said, "Please, please help us. Please don't leave us." She said, "My babies are dying and I can't do anything about it." And I looked in her eyes and I saw the same desperation and the same hopelessness that I saw on the road to Baghdad. And I knew at that moment that my life had changed. And I knew at that moment that I had to go down this road. And that I had to answer this calling that I think God made me to do. I didn't have an option anymore. And I was thinking to myself that day, we only have this life to live once. And I wanted to make sure that, with my life, that I actually, I do what I feel like I'm called to do. Thank you so much for coming out tonight, guys. I really do appreciate it, and I really care about you all. This is amazing turnout.